This is Kol Birama, the podcast of Congregation Ramat Raz 929 Tanakh Project. Join us each day as we study a chapter of Tanakh, building towards completing all 929 together. I'm Rabbi Yoni Zolti, and I'm glad you're here. Bereishit Chapter 44. Chapters 44 and 45 represent the dramatic apex of the Yosef saga. Yosef orchestrates a final test, arranging for his divining cup to be discovered in Binyamin's sack, thereby condemning him to slavery. The brothers, however, do not abandon Binyamin as Yosef perhaps anticipated, or feared, that they might. Instead, they rally to his defense, with Yehuda emerging as their spokesman and advocate. The speeches delivered in these chapters, Yehuda's impassioned plea in chapter 44, and Yosef's tearful revelation in chapter 45, constitute perhaps the two most pivotal rhetorical moments in the entire narrative. Over the next two episodes, we will examine each speech in turn, exploring their significance for understanding both the immediate drama and the larger thematic architecture of the Yosef story. Today, we begin with Yehuda's remarkable address. Yehuda's speech stands as one of the longest soliloquies in the Torah, certainly within Bereishit, and its emotional power proves overwhelming. The speech succeeds in its immediate objective. It convinces Yosef to abandon his stratagem and reveal his identity. This outcome may seem almost inevitable. How could Yosef possibly maintain his deception in the face of such raw, compelling eloquence? And yet, I would argue, because we as readers possess knowledge that Yehuda lacks, we know Yosef's true identity, we understand his motivations, and we see the psychological drama which is unfolding beneath the surface accusations, we risk missing what makes Yehuda's speech truly extraordinary, even peculiar. For Yehuda's address consists primarily of recapitulation, a rehearsal of events that have already transpired. And yet, this recap subtly alters certain details we thought we knew, while more significantly, focusing on entirely different elements than we might have expected. Consider what Yehuda's speech conspicuously leaves out. Reasonably, one would have expected him to mount a defense, protesting Yosef's initial charge of espionage, emphasizing the harsh treatment that the brothers have endured, pointing to the suspicious circumstances of money which repeatedly appears in their sacks. Any competent advocate would seize upon one of these elements to establish reasonable doubt. And yet none of this occurs. Yehuda never mentions the accusation of spying. He barely even references the stolen cup, the ostensible catalyst for this crisis, acknowledging only that it was found in Binyamin's possession, never attempting to explain or contest its presence. More telling still is how Yehuda recasts the events themselves. He describes their earlier encounter, Vayomer Adoni l'avadav, hayesh lachem av o ach. My Lord asked his servants, have you a father or brother? He characterizes Yosef's demand as fundamentally about seeing Binyamin, that unless they bring their youngest brother, they cannot see his face again. Yet this differs markedly from what we know. Yosef's initial interrogation centered on espionage. His demand to see Binyamin served as a test of truthfulness. Yehuda, however, presents it as though Yosef's primary interest from the outset involved meeting this particular brother. Instead of a defense, Yehuda offers a complete capitulation. Ma numar la'adoni, ma nedaber u'ma nistadak. What can we say to you, my Lord? What can we speak? How can we justify ourselves? He admits guilt that extends far beyond the immediate accusation. Ha-Elohim matzah et avon avadecha. God has uncovered the iniquity of your servants. These omissions and alterations might simply represent shrewd rhetoric. When seeking compassion from a powerful official, there is little strategic value in dwelling on disputes or grievances. Better to focus on elements that might evoke sympathy, the plight of an aged father, the vulnerability of a young child, than to rehearse contentious accusations that might only harden one's judge. By reframing the entire narrative away from criminality and towards family tragedy, Yehuda thus constructs a more sympathetic case. But, I would argue, something more profound is operating here, a pattern which recurs throughout the Yosef narrative. Time and again, the brothers recount their story in ways that inadvertently speak to deeper truths they cannot consciously perceive. When they first arrive in Egypt and Yosef imprisons them, they immediately connect their troubles to a different crime entirely, not to being spies, but rather, Ashimim anachnu alachinu ashirainu tzarat nafsho, we are guilty concerning our brother. Though not admitting any espionage, they speak of a deeper culpability, of a guilt due to past sins. What makes this recognition both poignant and prophetic is how precisely they identified the truth without knowing it. It actually is true. This is precisely why they are in jail. It is not because, as Yosef claimed, they may be spies, but because Yosef himself is exacting a reckoning for their crime of selling him into slavery. Their only mistake is that they attribute to divine providence what is in fact Yosef himself, who has become the instrument of this reckoning. In a similar way here in our chapter, Yehuda's speech inadvertently strips away pretense to expose the emotional core that has been present from the very beginning. He still believes he's addressing a foreign official with no personal stake in their family struggles. And yet, through his words, the narrative reveals what the story has truly been about all along. The stolen cups and espionage charges, all the machinery driving the plot, suddenly fall away as surface drama. What emerges is the real story: Yosef's longing to see Binyamin, the fraught dynamics between siblings, Yaakov's devastating favoritism, the family wounds that have never healed. What appears to be Yehuda's rhetorical choice becomes the text's profound revelation about this entire saga. Having thus reframed the narrative away from accusations and towards family, Yehuda constructs his entire plea around a single focus: the relationship between an aged, vulnerable father and his beloved youngest son. Throughout his speech, he repeatedly invokes Yaakov as Avinu Hazaken, our aged father, emphasizing not merely paternity, but advanced years and consequent fragility. Binyamin, by contrast, is not called Ach, but rather is called a Yeled, a child, described as a Ben Skunim, a child of his father's old age. The terminology relentlessly emphasizes the juxtaposition of aged vulnerability and youthful dependency. This is not merely rhetoric about abstract vulnerability and pathos. Yehuda's focus centers specifically on the devastating impact upon Yaakov, a father who has already lost one beloved son and cannot survive losing another. The appeal is for mercy towards this pitiful, loving father whose heart is bound up with his youngest child, and towards the family dynamics that will shatter if Binyamin does not return. Within this framework, Yehuda makes a remarkable disclosure. He reports Yaakov's words with an intensification that reveals painful family dynamics. Shnei banim yadali ishti. He says that Yaakov described, "My wife bore me two sons." In this single sentence, Yehuda acknowledges what the family has long known, but rarely articulated: that Yaakov's heart belongs particularly to Rachel and to her two children. These two sons occupied a unique status, sons of his wife, in a way that the other children, born to Leah and the handmaids, somehow are not. Yehuda continues with Yaakov's lament: "Vayitze ha'echad me'iti va'omar ach tarof taraf v'lo ri'iti adhena." One has gone from me, and I said, "Surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since." Then the devastating hypothetical: "Ulkachtem gam et ze me'im panai b'karau ason, v'horatem et sevati be'agon she'ola." If you take this one also from before my face and harm befalls him, then you will have descended me into hell. What proves remarkable is Yehuda's willingness to present this narrative to, ostensibly, a stranger, essentially admitting in his story that Yaakov values Binyamin and the missing Yosef more than all of his other sons, including Yehuda himself. When Yehuda offers himself as substitute, Yeshivna avdecha tachat hanar eved ladoni, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a slave to my lord, he's explicitly acknowledging that his own non-return would distress his father far less than Binyamin's detention. And yet, despite this, Yehuda expresses this reality without any sense of resentment, without jealousy, without bitterness. His speech radiates compassion and filial devotion, even as it acknowledges his secondary status in his father's affections. This represents a profound transformation from the Yehuda who proposed selling Yosef. Here is a Yehuda capable of genuine self-sacrifice, motivated purely by love for his father. His capacity for empathy may derive from his own experiences of loss. An earlier chapter chronicled the death of Yehuda's own sons, Er and Onan, followed by the complex narrative involving Tamar. Yehuda himself has endured the particular anguish of losing children. When he therefore describes Yaakov's fear, he yir'ek ein hana'ar vamet, when he sees that the boy is not there, that he will die, Yehuda speaks from an intimate knowledge of parental grief. He understands, perhaps uniquely among the brothers, the devastating power of a child's loss. This personal history lends authenticity and urgency to Yehuda's plea. He speaks not from abstract duty, but from lived experience, transforming rhetorical strategy into genuine human connection. Ultimately, Yehuda's speech reveals that the Yosef narrative concerns not merely what the brothers did to Yosef, but what they also did to Yaakov. The sailor presented not just fratricide, but sustained deception and emotional devastation inflicted upon their father. For more than 2 decades, Yaakov has mourned a son who lives, has suffered anguish his other sons knowingly perpetuated. Yehuda's speech brings this dimension into sharp focus. When he declares, "Ech ele el avi v'hanar inenu iti," how can I go up to my father if the boy is not with me? He articulates the impossibility of returning to inflict fresh anguish upon Yaakov. He cannot, he will not, be the bearer of such devastating news a second time. This represents both moral awakening and psychological insight. Yehuda finally comprehends the full weight of what they did to their father all those years ago, and he refuses to repeat that cruelty. His speech, therefore, succeeds, not through legal argumentation, but through unflinching honesty about familial relationships and demonstration of genuine transformation. He admits guilt, even when technically innocent, focusing on emotional truth rather than procedural justice, and offers himself as a substitute through selfless love. The man who once proposed selling Yosef has become a man capable of sacrificing himself for Binyamin. This is an incredible testament to Yehuda's transformation. Thank you for joining today's learning. See you tomorrow for the next chapter of Tanakh.